Welcome to the Elevate Media Podcast with your host, Chris Anderson. In this show, Chris and his guests will share their knowledge and experience on how to go from zero to successful entrepreneur. They have built their businesses from scratch and are now ready to give back to those who are just starting. Let's get ready to learn, grow, and elevate our businesses. And now, your host, Chris Anderson.
All right, welcome back to another recording of the Elevate Media Podcast. I am Chris Anderson, your host, and today we're going to dive into another successful, interesting individual story. And so I'm excited to share with you his journey from corporate to traveling the world and traveling the country to burning the boats and just, finding his new path. And so today we've brought on Ken Stearns, who's going to share about his journey and how he's overcome obstacles to get where he is today. So Ken, welcome to the Elevate Media Podcast today.
Chris, thanks a bunch. Really appreciate carving some time out for me. It's great to get a chance to tell my story.
Absolutely. And I'm excited for you to share it and for us to be able to dive into that. And so, I guess to start, tell people what you do right now, and then we'll kind of backtrack as to how you got there.
I love this. I've been thinking about this as a kind of a way story sometimes is, backwards. And it just it's a lot easier to tell your story from what you're doing today. I'm a bit like yourself in some ways. I have two podcasts right now that I'm working on. I have one that's newer, and it's called Mental Health Today. And it's an opportunity for me to learn a lot about mental health industry or, how people that are involved in helping people in various ways around mental health and addressing the crisis. And I formed that, after being on this journey that I'm on with my main podcast. And the first one I started, which is called The Jar. And, the concept behind that is I travel to 111 cities and sit down with 444 people and allow them to interact with a jar that I have created, where we had this jar built, these 4 custom jars, and we crammed them filled with 444 questions about life. And so it's just kind of this interesting concept of a self-driven interview, and people get a chance to kind of peel their own onion and tell their own story through interacting with the jar. And I know I did about 200 something of those. I visited about 100, almost about half the cities, about 50, 60 cities, and took a little break. And that reflection in December, I looked back and I was like, man, there's a mental health crisis. Mm-hmm. All the stories, so many of the stories really deeply intertwined into people's life story was some mental health, traumas along the way, and how they assemble those traumas later in life or at that point that I met them, and how they were looking back on those and kind of reflecting what the life lessons were and what they were supposed to do with that going forward. Some people, obviously a little bit more older, I don't want to say more mature, but older, and seasoned. They're seasoned. Like I call myself well-seasoned, right? So they're a little bit more seasoned, and they're looking back at it differently, right? So maybe they're at a place where it really is how to look back at life. Some people it's, halfway through my life and how do I adjust where I'm at? So, doing the Jar podcast led me to this mental health side. And so I'm now kind of carrying this double identity as I interview people. And it's kind of a little confusing for me, but, it is really intertwined, hearing people's stories on both sides. Yeah. And so it's a great chance today to kind of try to peel back my own onion and share with the audience what I've learned up to this point, with my regular corporate career, and then now becoming an entrepreneur and creating a couple of shows from nothing and seeing what's going to become of it.
Yeah. And it's always something that, to look back on our journeys and see where we've come from. And you, like you said, you were in the corporate, 30 something years. So what was that like? What were you doing in the corporate world, and what led you to want to kind of get out of it?
It's a crazy story. I was an insurance guy, and I was and really not a hyper successful insurance person by any stretch of the imagination, small companies on the West Coast. And I really did a lot of corporate to corporate sales and then talked to the employees about insurance. Kind of a voluntary, kind of a very casual approach to it, very, at work in a very relaxed environment. And turned out that there was a large American company that had operations in Asia, and they wanted to bring in this type of sales approach into their markets. So I moved to Hong Kong in 2001, took my family, so packed up my boats, put all my stuff in storage, and took a couple of suitcases and moved the family to Asia. young kids, and was there in Hong Kong for about 12 years in Hong Kong. And, from there, you're traveling to different markets and you're helping support local companies that are partially owned by the American conglomerate, and helping them build their business and helping, the young executives learn how to run an insurance company, transferring a lot of that skill and that knowledge. It's really training and skill transfer. Your job is to, as I used to say, I'd show up somewhere and be like, my job is to fire myself.
Yeah. So what was that?
My job is to get out of the way.
Yeah. Like that had to be a huge, like on top of going over there and trying to do your job. Oh yeah. You're transitioning children, your partner. What was that transition like? What was that like overall when you moved over there to Hong Kong?
You have to be pretty hard, or you learn to be hard very quickly. Yes. Everything's different. It's, you're
what
not.
What do you mean by hard?
Because everything is challenging. Going to the grocery store now is difficult. You got to find a new dentist. You go to the grocery store, it's nothing like a grocery store you've ever seen, right? Yeah. And, and even finding something or communicating at this point, early on in that, when we went, it was still a little bit rough. The brands are all different. Everything is different. So, I say hard, you get hardened or you go home, honestly.
You mean like thick skin
1 to 2
type?
years. Yeah, thick skin. Okay. Communication's difficult. You get driving if you do drive a car, planning to go somewhere is very difficult. Finding the roads, it's not everything's in English. It's marked different. You're driving on the wrong side of the road. Yeah. Like I said, you have to open up a new bank account. Moving money from here to there. How do you manage your stuff back home, your life back home? Travel is crazy. So, put your kids in school, find doctors. Everything is just upside down different. And going to corporate life, a lot of times you're working through translators, you're traveling here and there, you're eating weird foods. So you do develop a real sense of just kind of, you just go through life and you accept what happens, right? You show up in a meeting or you show up in at a dinner and you just kind of roll with the punches. And so you kind of learn to just take life a little bit easier. And I think, it's kind of strange. I traveled around. I worked in about 15 different countries over the time, maybe even more than 15. And I would rock up to a city, get out of the car. We'd go to somewhere. I'd meet some strange people. We'd have a conversation. We'd go maybe have some food. I'd get back in a car, go to a hotel. I'd end up in another plane, another city, another office. And so strangely, I ended up designing the JAR podcast, going to 111 cities, interviewing 444 people. I'm uniquely qualified for this job. I'm like the only person qualified for this crazy job to show up to towns, get settled, meet 4 strangers, sit in their home and ask them really deep personal questions. And it's funny because insurance, I used to talk to people and I would literally ask, how much do you weigh? How old are you? What medications do you take? Oh, you take this medication. How long have you had X? Right. And sometimes, very personal questions in insurance. And so I think that it's strange how life, I think God plays a big role in your success in your life. And, I think it's whether you call it God or the universe, it's strange how I ended up designing something, like I said, that I'm qualified for in a very interesting way. And it's been a blast really listening and hearing people's stories like you've been doing. It's magical. It really is magical. And sharing them with the world is really a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun.
100%. I think, you're right on. I mean, it's crazy to see how, like looking back on our journeys again, for me, how God has orchestrated everything. And in the moments back then, it's like no idea what was going on or like what the purpose was or the reasoning for certain things. And then being able to kind of in retrospect, oh, that's what he was doing. That's where he was leading me or what he was trying to get me to learn or grow through. And, I've been to China in the past for about a month and it is, such a culture shock, but I went over to lead or be one of the leaders on a leadership thing for college students. And so, that was a little bit different than I'm sure the corporate world, because when we went over there, like it was just, they were all excited, energized to see us. We were from America, not that we're better or anything, but just the differences in culture.
Oh yeah. You're interesting. You're an interesting person.
Is the corporate world the same way when you come over as an American, or are they more like I guess, would they be more standoffish or, closed off?
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
All the countries I worked in, went from India to New Zealand to Japan, everything in between, all lovely people, honestly. I can't think of a memory where I met a nasty person who wasn't welcoming and kind. I'm sure that happened, but I can't remember. It's overwhelmed by the great experiences. Yeah. And you are a bit of an anomaly. I mean, look, for sure, you're a foreigner. Yeah. And, for sure the company does. And even your own job is to promote yourself as an expert. Mm-hmm. So you do get a little bit of reverence for that. And there is a boss culture in Asia and globally as well. If you're a boss or you're a senior person, you're going to get some gratitude or latitude of respect. Now you got to hold that. Like anywhere, you've got to hold it. And, in Asia, you're also under a microscope because you are a foreigner. You're given a lot of grace, but you have to hold that. And, you can mess that up very easily. There is also a little bit more pressure to behave differently and to do things the right way. They hope that you manage differently in an American kind of a way or a Western way, which maybe they think, might be different. But, you just at the end of the day, I think you saw probably in China, despite the languages and some cultural differences, we're all humans. We all need that recognition. We need to be led. We're hungry to learn.
It really stuck out to me of like how with all these countries you went to, like the, general consensus is that they're welcoming, they're nice, and that's what I've experienced in my travels too. And even traveling around the U.S., the same kind of thing. And a lot of people who haven't traveled, they take what a country is or what the people of a country are like based on the media, social media. Yes. And sometimes that is all just painted in a negative light. Yes. And I think we focus so much on that instead of getting out and actually meeting someone, from that country and seeing how they act, or going to that country. Because I think we will see majority of the time, most people truly are welcoming and warm and caring. Like, I think it's unfortunate that we get the negative connotations and people outside the U.S. probably get it for us too. But like, until we come over and actually meet people, like I would say majority of the time, I mean, most people I've met in a different country, in a different state, have been welcoming and nice and, open. It's just a crazy thing, unfortunately.
So a few years ago, and it was before COVID, I had started, I think a good note for people, part of my story is, especially people who are in corporate or people who are considering a change. I think for your podcast, you're going to have a lot of people who listen and are thinking about how can I become Chris, or how, is this possible? Or just to hear the story of how it happens. And I call it unintended consequences. And it starts off by doing something. It's a strange thing. You have to be intentional in a way, and you have to plant a kind of a flag somewhere. And that's intentional. And you have momentum in a direction. You may not know where that's going to go, but the unintended consequences of that step can be so impactful. And this is so easy to do. You don't have to have a grand plan. You don't have to have this supervision of where you're going to go, where the road is going to lead, or what road is going to rise up to meet you as you do something. And I did the simplest thing was I wanted to learn guitar at 52. And to do that, the magic for this was I committed to myself. I said, I'm going to do 2 years. I'll buy a nice guitar. And to buy the nice guitar, I have to commit to play it for 2 years before I put it down. And I'm going to get lessons. I'll get a professional to sit with me every week. And so I'm going to spend this much on a guitar, and I can just double that down on how much I'm going to spend on lessons. Yeah. So it's a pretty decent amount of money I'm going to invest in myself. And that led down a strange road. I mean, before I even bought the guitar, I should have known, looking back, this was going to be a magical journey. so I'm with my daughter and I'm coming back from Arizona, coming to California. I'm going to head back to Thailand. I had just moved to Thailand. I had just gotten let go from the high, crazy level of leadership. I was managing a country with 400 sales offices, 250,000 salespeople. And we're about a $3 billion company in Indonesia. It's 300 million people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big company. It's a big place. Crazy job. And they put me into a very soft role in Thailand. And I thought, I'm going to buy a guitar. I'm going to commit to myself for a couple of years. And I'm just going to dive into myself for a little bit. Well, because I'm just PTSD after this crazy corporate stuff. And I walk into this guitar center in Las Vegas and I'm looking around this huge room with, 100 good, beautiful guitars, a couple of people walking around playing them. I don't even know what a left guitar, right guitar is. It's super intimidating.
Yeah.
And about after 5 minutes of just like walking around the circle, there's this like semicircle with all the guitars in the middle, and then they're all on the walls. And I'm like, this is probably a mistake. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't even know. I want to buy a guitar, but I have no idea what to do. And I'm going to make a mistake. And there's this one gentleman, I see him, and he looks a little bit like me. And he's kind of walking around and he looks kind of cool and he's playing, and he would pick up a guitar, very intentional, grab a guitar, and he just not fancy, not crazy, but just comfortable in his hands. This guy knows guitars. And I'm out of my corner of my eye, and eventually like, boom, we're right in front of each other. And I'm like, hi, like this awkward, like, hi. And I just go, I told him my story. I just blurted it out like, hey, I'm this 52-year-old, dorky dude. I want to learn guitar. What do I buy? And it was like that awkward. And he just looks at me straight away. He goes, get the red one. And, you're like, oh, what the hell does that mean? Or,
right.
Sorry. What the heck does that mean? And then he explains. He says, get the one that in a crowded room, you can only see that sitting there. The one you want to hold, the one you don't want to let go. And I mean, this is a random stranger and like that was powerful words on so many levels, like so many things in life. Get the red one, do the red thing. And I just was like, wow. And as soon as he said it, that guitar, that was the red one for me. Like I knew which one he was talking about. And I just went over there and I really looked at the price tag. It didn't matter what it was, $400 or $2,000. That was my guitar. And I still have it. And I did the 2 years. Because of that, I met my guitar teacher. And my guitar teacher said, after a few lessons, we should write a song. We should write a song every Sunday. Come on, we should write a song. And I thought, dude, I can't even, my fingers hurt. I can't listen to myself play. I stink so badly. And I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even have blisters yet. But all of a sudden it reminded me, I had written some words on airplanes. I had started a couple of books and they were just like outlines and I'd written some words. And I went in one Sunday, I said, you know what, let me hold on. And I went in, I got my notes and we pulled out these scrap papers that I'd written on airplanes a few years before. And the first song was out of a book, a concept book I had called Dear God, Letters to God. And the one I had the most written down was a chapter called Faith. And the idea of my book is, Dear God, what is faith? Because, is it this? Is it that? And so I looked in that and we just highlighted parts that I'd written that sounded like like a good chorus or a verse. And so we cobbled together some verses and then we had a chorus. And after a couple of Sundays, we wrote a song. I got so infatuated with writing music that I had to write the book. So I started writing the book because I was pursued the red one. And the book, ultimately, the completed parts, it's kind of worth sharing this construct of it. There's four parts to it. So it took me about another year to put the construct together. And so it really came down to 4 parts. I call it the book of self, book of others, book of all, and book of you. And the first part is 3 letters in there, 3 chapters. It's your yesterdays, your todays, and your tomorrows. And that's the book of self, meaning everything inside in your gray matter, all the stuff we think about. Yeah. The battlefield of the mind. And the book of others is a skill, Chris, for between you and I, between you and another person. And that's acceptance, forgiveness, compassion.
Mm.
And using those in your interpersonal relationships. And, what can that do for you? And the book of all, kind of a humanity approach, going out to the world with love, karma, and a service mind.
Yeah.
So, got a loving heart as you go out there. And for people listening, go out today with a loving heart and leave people and places better than you find it. That's my karma.
Yeah.
My karma tagline. And service, be service minded, go out there, look for the opportunities to help somebody else today, in your life, in general. What does that look like? I think you'll know this, as you said, the signs we get. If you have that in your intention, you will be presented with those chances.
Yep.
If you're not thinking about it, it may be there and you probably miss it.
Right.
But if you have it as an open, like, I'm out here to see what's the universe going to show me today? How can I help somebody? How can I help, and you'll see it. The universe will show it to you. And the last one is a book of you, and that's God or the universe or a higher power, whatever your spiritual language is going to be. And that was faith, hope, and prayer. And, prayer could be mindfulness or meditation, whatever. But, the faith and hope part is faith in what? Faith in yourself, faith in something bigger. The faith part's great. And so those 12 topics are then somehow, as I built out this podcast called The Jar, somehow it came to me. It's not my idea. I can't really remember how it came together. But I used that book to create 444 questions for The Jar. So those are the top covered in The Jar. And it's kind of an interesting conversation because there's just 12 topics, but there's 400 questions. And so people get a chance to, as we sit down and they're peeling these questions back, there's this, the thread kind of feels like it's digging in certain places for people. And so the truth really comes out. It's quite interesting being on the other side of the table.
Yeah, that's cool. Like, just again, seeing how our journeys, again, look back on your journey. Like, a lot of you listening are just starting out trying to build a business or, grow your side hustle, whatever it is. And don't forget where you started. Because a lot of times, like, you'll see these little pieces that fell together that if we're just trying to focus and rush to the next thing, we're going to miss, and we're going to miss the beauty of the journey. And I think that's the important thing, is to remember, enjoy the journey. It's not about the destination necessarily, because that goal will always change. We're never going to be satisfied if we're just focused on the destination. So if we can enjoy the journey and see the beauty of it, like Ken's sharing about, like, just his red guitar that led to everything, and just all the connections there, even through the struggles of, losing positions and things of that nature, and transitioning to different countries. So, Ken, as we're wrapping things up on this episode, I would love to kind of hear, maybe if you're talking to someone, who's listening to this show right now, who's out there, they got the 9 to 5, they got the family, they're trying to build this side hustle into a full-time thing.
Yes.
What 3 takeaways you'd want them to, take from this episode, from your journey so far? What would those 3 things be?
I think that first lesson really is be intentional. And you don't have to know the outcome. Be okay with the unknown. Yeah. And it's one of the big questions I've got early on. The question is faded quite interestingly now that I reflect on it. But a lot of people early on were asking me, after this, what are you doing? What's next? What happens? Early on, I had this kind of defined idea of, 111 cities, 444 people. And actually, the first time somebody asked me, I was like, I don't know.
Right.
I hadn't thought that far ahead. And over time, a couple people, as I had this conversation, the main comment people gave me was, "Oh, the path will rise to meet you." Mm-hmm. And it's such comfort in that. And I think that's a great takeaway for people. You don't have to be 100% certain what's going to happen next. You just go and start. And I've also got one of my belief systems in business is momentum. And so, I think be intentional. And the other one, from that would be, I would just say, follow that, which is momentum. And that intentionality will create this momentum. And I kind of like one of my analogies, and I have no idea if it's scientifically even remotely true, but I say it anyway. And one day I'll look it up to try to prove it scientifically, but I imagine hooking up an F-150, a 1972 Ford truck. You hook that sucker up to a giant train with about, a freight train with, 50 cars behind it. And, you put a rope on that thing. you can pull that. Eventually, you're going to get that train moving.
Yeah.
And then when it's moving, you turn that Ford truck around and try to stop that train.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck. And this is the power of momentum. It
Mm.
may be slow rolling, but it's going to have a lot of momentum. And again, ask that question is my third one, is ask people, like you said, people are so friendly. They're open. And there are people around you when you're intentional, when you start taking that first step. Again, the universe, God will open those doors and put those people in a place for you to meet. I truly think the guy on the chair playing the guitar, the red one, I'm not even sure he's a real person. I mean, he could have honestly, I look back and it's like, I'm not even sure he was like real. Like, who says that? Right.
Right.
Who says pick the red one? It's just not a normal, it's just not a thing that happens.
Right.
Unless you're putting yourself out there and you've got that intentionality. And then, in my search for a guitar teacher, I met a very unique, interesting person, and also somebody who shouldn't exist. He's the son of a priest, and his father was on a long fishing trip for a couple of years, came back and found out he had a son. Turned out that son was a priest's son, small island in the Philippines. He's not supposed to be here, but I met him and I was supposed to meet him. I mean, he works on my show. He's helped me write songs. We're best friends. And this is all because I picked the red one. And so I just encourage people to, be intentional, look around you to see who's in front of you, who's being presented to you to help you on your journey. Once you make that decision, the universe is going to go absolutely to work to make it happen for you. So be brave, be intentional, take that first step, get some momentum going, and then just follow the path.
I love it. Yeah, I think those are great things. Be intentional, get started, get moving, gain that momentum.
And the trust that they'll be there. The path will be there for you.
Yeah. And then just look who's around you, who can feed into your journey and whose journey can you feed into. And I think that's a great one. It's all about people. And so, Ken, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed our time together today. Your story, your journey, what you learned through it. And I'm sure that someone listening can take a lot away from this and start, implementing things in their lives or just be motivated to continue on their journey. And so thank you again for being on and sharing. Where can people find you, connect with you to hear more about your story and see what you're up to?
Yeah, real easy place to find us is thejar.live. So www.thejar.live. Everything is on there. You can find our, all of our channels there and hear a little bit more of the story, the backstory and everything else. And Chris, thanks so much for having me on as a guest. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, make sure you get connected with Ken, just continue to learn and hear his story and the stories of others. And go out, share this with somebody who it can make a difference in, because together we can reach more people, make a difference, helping elevate other people's stories together. So Ken, again, thank you so much for being on the Elevate Media podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Media podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. See you in the next episode.